Hey everyone, tonight we start with the dog, an animal that has had a bigger impact on human history than more than half of all the kings we've ever had. So, before you get too comfortable, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Only do this if you really like what I do here. Please leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always interesting to see who is joining us from all over the world. Now, turn down the lights and maybe turn on a fan to make a soft background noise, and let's take it easy. The trip we take together tonight. The Ice Age wasn't a magical snowy place where everyone learned how to be friends. Nature's most sadistic intern made it a frozen nightmare. The weather tried to kill you. People who hunt you tried to kill you. Sometimes your own campfire would fall into your lap and try to kill you. People stayed alive because they were stubborn, made bad choices, and sometimes got lucky. One of those accidents started the best friendship ever. Think about yourself wrapped in animal skins that smell like mold and regret, sitting next to a fire that isn't even warm enough to be called warm. It looks like all of your family members are tired raccoons wearing hats made of other raccoons. Dinner is a piece of mammoth meat that is so burnt that it is charcoal. The mood is low. There is no hygiene. A long time ago, hope was a myth. Then you hear it. A low growl came from the dark. Not polite, not friendly. The kind of growl that means, I'm thinking about eating you and your. It's wolves, not shoes. Of course it is. Wolves have been watching your camp all day, judging how bad your hunting skills are. They think you're a walking disappointment with a heartbeat. But tonight, something strange happens. The world's least successful wolf comes out of the shadow steps. A skinny, socially awkward reject from the bottom of the pack. The type of wolf that squirrels pick on. He's starving, desperate, and clearly making bad choices in life, like going up to people with spears and worry. He walks closer to the light of the fire. People get scared inside. The wolf sits down like he owns the place. Everyone stops moving. No one wants to be the first to eat. The wolf's face looks like that of a modern dog when you open a bag of chips. And then, in an act of ancient stupidity that changed the world, someone throws him a piece of junk. Not because I care, not because I hope, but maybe if he eats this, he won't eat me. The wolf picks up the scrap and trots back into the dark, tail twitching in. What could be thanks or an upset stomach? He comes back the next night, and the next, and the next. Soon he's sitting closer, sleeping nearby, and growling at other animals like he's the camp's security guard. People put up with him because, let's face it, life is easier when something with sharp teeth is on your side. The killer slowly turns into the freeloader. The person who doesn't pay becomes the friend. And the thing that used to hunt us becomes the first dog. All because there were two kinds of. They were too cold, hungry, and tired to kill each other. Once the world's least scary wolf figured out that people were just a walking buffet of half-cooked disappointment. He brought friends, not the cool alpha wolves. No, those wolves had rules. These were the outcasts, the oddballs, and the wolves that even their own mothers sighed at. These wolves looked at their reflection in a frozen pond and thought, I'm doing my best. They found the greatest invention of all time. The trash pile came long before fire, farming, or the wheel. For Ice Age wolves, the pile of human trash was like walking into a Michelin-starred restaurant where the chef is blindfolded and hates his job. Burnt bones, scraps of meat, and fat that people threw away because even starving people said no. Wolves loved it. They thought it was fancy food. Soon, these wolves started to hang out at the edges of the camp, close enough to smell the stew, which smelled like sadness, but far enough away that they could run if. A rock was thrown. It was a relationship based on fear, caution, and very low standards for good food. People, on the other hand, realized something magical. The wolves that stayed were the ones that didn't try to take your leg right away. This was a useful trait in the time of ice. So, the situation changed. Wolves came close to camp. People held on to their spears. Wolves put on their best, I'm harmless and pathetic face. People sighed, threw a bone, and grumbled about how this wasn't their work. Every night, the wolves that were the least aggressive or the most hungry came back. And over time, these wolves changed, not in a spiritual or philosophical way. Evolution basically said, let's make these things smaller, dumber, and more appealing to humans who clearly love a fixer-upper. Snouts got shorter, eyes got wider, and tails started to wag on their own, probably because one wolf got too excited about leftovers and found out it got more leftovers. Over time, the wolves became less, I might eat your children, and more, I'm here for snacks and emotional support. But the wolves weren't doing charity. They got something out of this too. Warmth from human fires, protection from larger predators, a stable food supply, assuming humans caught anything that day. Occasional mammoth jerky, because desperation makes cooks generous. Evolution had done something extraordinary. It turned a deadly predator into the world's first professional trash eater. And humans, for once, felt slightly safer, not because they were stronger or smarter, but because a wolf with no goals decided that humans were easier to live with than other wolves. Welcome to the beginning of domestication, the laziest but most successful partnership in history. Domestication wasn't a magical moment when a wolf suddenly rolled over and said, I think I'll be cute now. No, it took thousands of years of slow, reluctant evolution, mostly because of hunger, laziness, and the realization that biting people was a bad career move. At this point, the wolves hanging around human camps weren't exactly wolves anymore. They were wolf-shaped disappointments. The runts, the socially anxious, the ones who couldn't hunt, couldn't fight, and probably failed basic wolf school. If wolves had student loans, these were the ones defaulting. But these were also the wolves who discovered something revolutionary. Acting slightly less murdery gets you free food. This was the dawn of survival. Through cuteness, a wolf with a slightly rounder face gets more leftovers. A wolf who doesn't growl at toddlers gets invited closer to the fire. A wolf whose tail wiggles instead of thrashing in rage, gets awe noises, a sound that triggers the ancient human instinct to give away snacks. And so, generation after generation, these camp wolves changed. Not dramatically, not instantly, but slowly, like a bad haircut growing out. Their skulls shrank, their teeth softened, their eyes widened into the expression scientists now classify as emotionally manipulative. Wolves became dogs the same way people become influences by performing harmless behavior until someone pays attention. Meanwhile, humans began to notice something else. These newly evolved proto-dogs didn't just stop attacking, they started helping, kind of. One wolf might bark when a predator approached, another might trail behind hunters, hoping for scraps and accidentally contributing to the hunt. A third might simply sit in camp, giving emotional. People looked at these creatures, which were smaller than wolves, friendlier than wolves, and 10 times less skilled than wolves, and thought, this one might survive if I protect it. So they did. The strong wolves died out, and the cute, needy, clingy ones thrived. Evolution praised this new strategy called being adorable, and so the great transformation continued from predator to scavenger, from scavenger to sidekick, from sidekick to creature that sleeps in your bed and steals half your pillow. The murder instinct faded, the feed me instinct intensified, and humanity found itself raising the world's first professional, loaf-shaped companion. By the time protodogs had fully committed to the less murder, more mooching lifestyle, humans began to realize something shocking. These little ex-wolves were actually useful, not very competent, not very coordinated, but useful in the way a loud, anxious roommate is useful. They might not help with chores, but they will definitely bark when something strange happens. Dogs were the first alarm systems in the world. Imagine a night in prehistoric times. The wind is howling, the fire is crackling, and your clan is trying to sleep through the sound of someone snoring like a dying mammoth. Suddenly, a rustling sound comes from the darkness. Before humans can get to their spears, one of the camp dogs starts barking like crazy. Not brave, not heroic, just really loud. Loud enough to wake the dead. Loud enough to scare off predators. Rethink their life choices. This was a huge change. Humans had never made anything that could do this. Before dogs, their security system was to listen for trouble and hope their ears worked. Crying dogs changed that. They barked at anything they thought was scary at the time, like predators, strangers, shadows, suspicious rocks, and even their own tail. And even though prehistoric humans had a lot of problems, not being able to sleep because of dog barking was probably their first universal problem. Experience. But dogs weren't just noise machines. They were territorial. They adopted the camp as their domain. The same wolf who once considered humans trail mix with limbs now patrolled around the fire like an overworked bouncer. Humans appreciated this. They rewarded it with scraps, pets, and constant enabling. The same dynamic that still exists between dogs and humans today. Soon, dogs discovered another superpower, tracking things better than humans ever could. They could smell predators before humans even sensed. Danger. They could tell the difference between harmless noises and something that wanted to eat you, and even though dogs didn't often fight predators directly, they were still learning how to be brave. They were great at loudly announcing danger and then bravely hunting behind people, and people, for their part, started to see these messy, needy, tail wagging creatures as allies, not wild animals. Dogs weren't perfect. They still stole food, made bad choices, and panicked at nothing. But for the first time in prehistory, humans had something watching their backs, something loyal, something protective, something that occasionally did the right thing on purpose. The Ice Age was still brutal, but now humans didn't face the darkness alone. By now, early dogs weren't just scavengers or furry alarm clocks. They were becoming partners on the most miserable team sport in human history, Ice Age hunting. A sport where the rules were simple: catch something or starve, preferably catch something that won't. Dogs had superpowers, like noses that could smell prey from miles away, ears that twitched at the sound of a twig snapping, and energy levels that made humans seriously rethink their own stamina. A typical hunt went like this. Humans saw a herd of something big, angry, and with horns that could rearrange your bones. Dogs notice it too, usually before people do, and then they start barking like unpaid interns who want to impress their boss. The noise scares the prey, which either runs away or charges forward, depending on how the animals are feeling. The dogs run ahead, fueled by excitement, adrenaline, and no thoughts at all. People follow behind, fueled by hunger, fear, and the fact that their winter coat is literally falling apart. Together, they make up the world's first dysfunctional hunting party. It works, which is surprising. Dogs chase prey into traps. Dogs flush animals out of hiding places. Dogs track injured animals through forests that people would get lost in right away. Dogs do all the dangerous legwork, while people show up at the end and throw spears like they did all the work. The best part is that dogs think this is fun. They don't know how to assess risk or understand fatal consequences. They're just happy to be doing something that isn't freezing to death or barking at a leaf. Of course, not every dog was a born hunter. Some dogs got distracted by butterflies. Some chased the wrong animal for 2 hours. Some ran off entirely and returned with a stick, proudly convinced they'd solved hunger forever. But humans tolerated all of this because even the stupidest dog occasionally helped catch something edible. Ice Age hunting with dogs wasn't perfect, but it was better, faster, more successful, and most importantly, it bonded humans and dogs in shared triumph and shared trauma. There's nothing like almost being trampled by a mammoth together to build trust. And slowly, humans began to realize these creatures weren't just useful, they were becoming essential partners, companions, something dangerously close to friends. Somewhere between barking at predators and chasing mammoths with questionable enthusiasm, dogs crossed a line. They moved in, not in a formal sign this lease agreement way, more in an I'm cold, you're warm, and this arrangement benefits me more than you way. And humans, worn down by the Ice Age and poor decision making, let it happen. Originally, dogs slept near the edges of campfires, not too close. Humans smelled weird and made unpredictable noises in their sleep, but close enough to enjoy the heat. Then, one especially bold dog decided he was tired of frostbite and simply walked into a human shelter like he owned the place. Humans stared. The dog stared back. Then he curled up in the corner and acted like this was completely normal. And just like that, the living room was lost to humanity. At first, only a few dogs did this. The bravest, the dumbest, and the ones who mistook danger for opportunity. But soon enough, more followed. They realized that humans had made blankets. Primitive, smelly blankets, yes, but soft enough compared to sleeping on frozen dirt. Humans protested at first. They complained. They pushed the dogs away. And then, when the temperature dropped to why are we alive? They pulled the dogs closer against their will. Nothing warms up a cold shelter like a 50 LB fluffy space heater that sometimes snores. This was the moment everything changed. Dogs started treating human camps as their dens. They guarded them without being asked. They growled at strangers, barked at weird noises, and woke everyone up at 3 a.m. because a pine cone moved in a threatening way. Humans didn't realize it yet, but the domestication process was complete. The dogs weren't living with humans. The humans were living with dogs. Dogs claimed the warmest sleeping spots. Dogs. Dogs ate the best scraps and got involved in family matters like furry diplomats. They decided who could come to the camp and who couldn't. They even tried to help with chores, which mostly ended up in chaos, but was still appreciated. The strangest part was that humans didn't hate it. Even though there was fur everywhere, barking all the time, food being stolen, and dogs not respecting personal space, humans grew emotionally attached. Because dogs did. Something no Ice Age human expected. They made life less miserable. The nights didn't feel so long. The cold felt less cruel. And for the first time in human history, someone greeted you with joy simply because you existed. The partnership was sealed not by blood, not by ritual, but by warmth, leftovers, and loneliness. As the Ice Age thawed and humanity collectively decided it preferred not dying of frostbite, civilization finally sprouted, and with it, dogs strutted right into the spotlight like they were auditioning for a historical documentary. And nowhere did they shine brighter than ancient Egypt, the land of gold, gods, pyramids, and an alarming enthusiasm for shaving things. Egyptians took one look at dogs and said, "Yes, this creature clearly has divine potential," which is funny considering dogs were still rolling in questionable substances and eating whatever fell on the ground. But the Egyptians admired loyalty, courage, and a good set of teeth, qualities dogs had in abundance. Unlike half the royal, dogs protected homes, herded livestock, and went with hunters into marshes full of hippos, crocodiles, and birds that looked like they were angry. Egyptian hunters trusted their dogs more than their fellow nobles, and who could blame them? Egypt took dog appreciation to new heights. They painted dogs on pottery, carved them into statues, and even buried their dogs with them so they could keep peeing on sacred objects in the afterlife. And then there was Anubis, the jackal-headed god of death and embalming. And please don't haunt me. Egyptians said he wasn't really based on dogs, but let's be honest, ancient Egyptian jackals looked a lot like street dogs with eyeliner. The divine message was clear. Dogs were respected, feared, loved, and rumored to work part-time guiding souls into the underworld. Despite all this worship, Egyptians also had a bad habit. They shaved their dogs, not for cleanliness or health reasons, but because bald dogs were in style. Picture a majestic hunting dog that was proud and skilled suddenly being shaved until it looked like a confused, shivering rat with existential questions. That was Egyptian style. Still, dogs in Egypt lived better lives than most peasants. They had names, collars, and fan art. Some even had funerals that were more elaborate than those of average taxpayers. If reincarnation is real, you definitely wanted to come back as an Egyptian noble's dog, not his servant. In Egypt, dogs were no longer just camp companions. They were symbols of protection, friendship, loyalty, and the universal truth. Dogs were already our best friends. Humans were just finally catching up. By the time dogs reached ancient Greece, they had survived the Ice Age, found religion in Egypt, and were now ready to deal with something far more stressful. Greek philosophers. Wolves had once faced mammoths. Dogs had once faced starvation, but nothing prepared them for a toga-earring intellectual trying to explain ethics for 6 hours straight. In Greece, dogs were everywhere. In workshops, marketplaces, gymnasiums. Yes, Greeks exercised a lot. And most importantly, in philosophical schools. And if you're wondering what dogs were doing there, the answer is simple: sleeping through lectures. Dogs have always understood that the correct response to a man explaining the nature of truth is to take a nap. Yet the Greeks admired dogs deeply. They saw dogs as symbols of loyalty, bravery, and moral clarity. Everything the average Athenian citizen lacked. Greek warriors used dogs for protection. Farmers used them to guard flocks. Hunters used them to chase down prey. And philosophers used them as metaphors because apparently no discussion of virtue was complete without mentioning a good boy. But the funniest part, there was an entire philosophical movement named after dogs. The Cynics. The word cynic literally means dog-like, not because they were loyal. No, because they lived simply, barked at society's nonsense, refused to follow rules, and occasionally peed in public to make a point. Dogs would have been proud. Socrates praised dogs for their ability to tell friend from enemy. Plato compared dogs to ideal guardians. Aristotle claimed dogs had a form of practical wisdom, which is ironic considering this was an era when dogs still ate rocks for fun. Meanwhile, Greek households adored their dogs and treated them surprisingly well. They gave them names like Foxy, Whitey, Growler, and Blitzer, proving that humans have always been bad at naming things. Dogs lounged in courtyards, begged for food in tavern entrances, and inserted. Greek dogs had jobs, real jobs. They guarded temples, herded goats, and went into battle with soldiers, which Socrates politely declined to do. They even protected city gates at night, barking at strange sounds, and sometimes at nothing at all. This is a proud tradition that is still going on today. In the classical world, dogs weren't just pets, they were also co workers, bodyguards, and furry symbols of love. Everything humans wanted to be, but rarely were. The Greeks knew one thing better than anyone else: dogs live simply, love deeply, and judge silently, which makes them smarter than most philosophers. When dogs got to ancient Rome, they found something scary: an empire that tried to militarize everything. If Rome could weaponize it, it did. If it couldn't weaponize it, Rome conquered it anyway and wrote a manual about why weaponizing it was a great idea. Of course, dogs didn't escape this. The Romans thought that dogs were loyal, fast, and emotionally available, and they said, "Yes, perfect. Let's put armor on it." Enter the Roman war dog, an animal who did not sign up for this job. These dogs, often mastiffs or massive Maloyan breeds, marched alongside legions, wearing spiked collars and occasionally chainmail. Imagine being a barbarian warrior, psyching yourself up for battle, only to see a huge armored dog charging at you like the world's angriest kitchen appliance. Roman. Commanders loved these dogs, not because they were cute. That feeling was not allowed in the military, but because they could scare enemies and bite things on command. War dogs guarded camps, delivered messages, attacked intruders, and most importantly, stole food from soldiers who were already starving. They were true multitaskers. But it wasn't all war and violence. Romans also loved dogs at home. Wealthy families kept lapdogs with names like Fiddle, Little One, and Bitey. These tiny dogs slept on silk cushions, ate scraps from banquets, and definitely judged every guest who entered the villa. Meanwhile, Roman soldiers on the frontier shared their rations with giant shaggy dogs who smelled like battle and potatoes. Roman farmers used dogs to guard livestock. Merchants used them to protect caravans. Even Roman priests used dogs during certain rituals, though the dogs probably had no idea why they were there and assumed it involved snacks. And of course, being Romans, they recorded everything. We have tombstones dedicated to beloved pets, scraps from banquets, and definitely judged every guest who entered the villa. Meanwhile, Roman soldiers on the frontier shared their rations with giant shaggy dogs who smelled like battle and potatoes. Roman farmers used dogs to guard livestock. Merchants used them to protect caravans. Even Roman priests used dogs during certain rituals, though the dogs probably had no idea why they were there and assumed it involved snacks. And of course, being Romans, they recorded everything. We have tombstones dedicated to beloved pets, with poetic words like, "I am in tears while carrying you to your last resting place, as much as I rejoiced when bringing you home in my own hands." Romans didn't show this level of emotion to real people very often. But the most ironic thing is that, for all their praise of war, conquest, and discipline, Rome still quietly bowed to the emotional power of dogs. A dog could guard an empire. A dog could march with legions. A dog could fight with courage that no senator ever had. But at night, after the fighting, even the toughest Roman soldier slept better with a dog at his feet. In Rome, as in other places, dogs were not just soldiers, they were family. As the Roman Empire grew across Europe, and the Greeks argued about everything from morals to the meaning of chairs, dogs were quietly doing something much more impressive, taking over the world without even trying. No strategy, no legions, no diplomacy, just pause, charm, and no idea what borders are. When people built the Silk Road, a long, dusty road that went from China to the Mediterranean, dogs saw it and thought, nice, a walk. So they went. Dogs followed merchants wherever they went, across deserts, mountains, and cities. Sometimes they did it on purpose, sometimes because a merchant dropped a dumpling, and sometimes because a dog woke up from a nap and realized it was 600 meters from home and just went with it. Caravans going from China to Persia had the same three things: camels, complaining, merchants complaining, louder dogs, who complained about nothing but still ate the most. Dogs became the Silk Road's unofficial employees. They guarded tents at night, chased thieves, and scared off animals that wanted to eat the merchandise. Traders learned one important truth: you can trust a dog more than a business partner. Different cultures began swapping more than silk and spices. They swapped breeds. A Persian better might meet a Chinese caravan and see a fluffy little dog and think, my wife will either love this or throw it at me. And suddenly, peeing geese were flying across continents like tiny, angry diplomats. At the same time, tough shepherd dogs from Central Asia moved west, joining nomads and protecting livestock from wolves that hadn't read the memo that dogs were now on Team Human. Every stop on the Silk Road added another chapter. In India, dogs found temples to guard and leftovers to steal. In Persia, they protected caravans and pretended to be noble. In Central Asia, they made friends with horsemen who had no fear of death. In China, they became spoiled palace pets who judged everyone. Dogs didn't just spread biologically, they spread culturally. People told stories about them, merchants traded them, and kings asked for them as gifts. Dogs that wandered great empires, sniffing everything in sight, changed how people saw wolves. By the time the Silk Road was fully operational, dogs had done something amazing. They became the first global citizens. By following people who dropped crumbs. While humans mapped trade routes, built empires, and fought over territory, dogs simply existed, and somehow that was enough to take over the world. As civilization got richer, fatter, and more obsessed with showing off, dogs entered a new era, the status symbol era. This was when dogs stopped being just hunters, guards, or walking alarm systems. Now they were luxury items, fashion accessories, indicators of wealth, living proof that your social standing was so high you could afford a creature that did absolutely nothing. In wealthy Greek households, owning a fancy dog was the ancient equivalent of posting a picture of your sports car on Instagram. The more exotic the breed, the more people assumed you had a ridiculous amount of money and zero real problems. Aristocrats strutted through markets with elegant, fluffy dogs at their heels, while the dogs themselves looked constantly confused by their new environment. Why are there marble statues everywhere? Why is everyone yelling about democracy? But Rome took this idea to the next level. Roman nobles kept toy dogs that were so small they could fit inside sleeves. These dogs had no reason to exist, evolutionarily speaking. They didn't hunt, guard, or bark well. Their main job was to sit on silk pillows and look judgmental. Many of them did. At the same time, professional dog breeders started making dogs just for rich people. These breeders probably came up with half of the modern dog problems we still deal with today: overbred noses, fragile bones, and anxiety disorders inherited from 1,000 generations of palace gossip. It wasn't just small dogs, though. Wealthy elites loved massive dogs too, enormous Maloyan beasts that could guard estates, intimidate rivals, and accidentally crush your furniture. Owning one was the ancient version of saying, I have power. If it sits on me, I might also die. Art also started to include dogs. Every person who respects themselves. Noble people wanted their portrait painted with a dog next to them to show that they were smart, loyal, and emotionally deep. Some nobles clearly loved their dogs more than their wives, even though the sculptures that are still around show this. As more and more empires adopted dog culture, one thing became clear. Dogs were no longer just animals. They were social markers, political statements, signs of taste, wealth, refinement, and sometimes delusion. The dog that used to hunt mammoths now lived in marble villas and ate roasted duck. Duck. The wolf who used to live by chasing deer now lived by being cute enough to avoid being kicked out. And people didn't mind at all, because nothing says, I am wealthy and important, like a creature who doesn't do anything and still gets treated like royalty. Welcome to medieval Europe, where the average peasant's life expectancy was somewhere between don't get your hopes up and the plague is coming again. If you were poor, which was everyone but 3 people, your daily life involved working from dawn to dusk, eating bread that could break your teeth, and trying not to get sick with a cough that ends with burial. Dogs became very important in this mess, not as status symbols or luxury items, but as tools for staying alive. The peasant in the Middle Ages had 3 ways to protect himself from disaster: a wooden door that wouldn't close all the way, a dog that barked at everything, and prayer. Medieval watchdogs weren't the cool soldiers in the Roman legions. They were dirty, scruffy, and smelled like compost and bad choices. They looked like potatoes, but they were loyal, alert, and always ready to sound the alarm, even if the only thing that scared them was a leaf blowing in a strange way. These dogs patrolled the village's fences, protected the livestock, and walked peasants home after long days in the fields. They weren't spoiled. They didn't get brushed. They definitely didn't get any high-quality medieval kibble. Most of what they ate came from the table, like old bread, and things they found on the ground that no one else talks about. But in their own way, peasants in the Middle Ages loved them. A dog could sleep by the fire, which is a nice way to say pile of burning sticks, keep the kids warm in the winter, and scare off thieves who were willing to steal from someone who had nothing. Dogs were basically furry roommates who kept predators away. Wolves, foxes, or a knight who got drunk and fell asleep in the wrong cottage once in a while. But the partnership was good for both sides. Dogs got warmth, a family of people, and a trustworthy source of food, even if it tasted bad. They also got love, not fancy collars or soft pillows, but pats on the head and a life free of pack politics. Dogs in the Middle Ages had jobs. They took care of the sheep. They watched over the granaries. They walked around on muddy roads like knights protecting their honor. But knights usually smelled better. Peasants were at the bottom of the village's social ladder, but dogs were somewhere between peasants and the local priest. And, to be honest, they deserved it. While Europe was fighting plague, famine, taxes, raiders, and more plague in the Middle Ages, these loyal animals stayed with people, barking their sad little barks into the dark. And in some way, it worked. Peasants in the Middle Ages needed dogs to stay alive, but nobles needed dogs for much more dramatic reasons. Status, ego, and emotional support during times of political crisis. You'd think that dogs in castles and dogs in villages were completely different because they lived such different lives. Species. Dogs of peasants slept on dirt floors. Noble dogs slept on cushions filled with goose feathers and the pain of the poor. It was a mess in castles. There were plotting nobles, bored knights, moody princes, and at least one jester who seemed to be going crazy. The castle hound came into this medieval soap opera, big, strong, loyal, and usually better behaved than everyone else in the building. Nobles loved hunting because it gave them a reason not to have to rule. Their dogs were very important. For this, these dogs were taught to follow boar, chase deer, and ignore the cries of peasants who were worried about losing their livestock in the woods again. Castle hounds were real professionals, but the nobles who owned them weren't. Imagine a scene from a hunt. A brave knight with a shiny helmet that he can't see through, a group of servants doing all the work, and a pack of dogs running ahead, thinking, finally, someone is letting us do our job instead of making us sit through another. Banquet. These dogs were the best of the best, strong, fast, and loyal. They watched over castles, patrolled courtyards, and most of the time politely refused to eat messengers. Some castles even had whole rooms just for dogs, which were naturally warmer than the servants' quarters. Noble ladies, on the other hand, kept smaller dogs, delicate little things that spent their days on velvet cushions, getting more love than most husbands. These tiny dogs never hunted, never protected anything, and never did anything useful except sometimes a dramatic fainting spell. In a way, they were influenced by the Middle Ages. Dogs were also emotional anchors for nobles. Knights hugged their dogs before going to war. Lords trusted them. During political dinners, where everyone pretended to like each other, queens fed them scraps under the table. The royal scribes didn't know as much about palace secrets as the dogs did, and they could also keep them. But the real funny part is that no matter how fancy their surroundings or how much their collars cost, dogs in the castle still acted like dogs. They chased chickens, stole bread, barked at ghosts, and wouldn't come when called. This is because a dog will always be a dog, no matter how well they are treated. And the nobles of the Middle Ages needed that kind of honest chaos more than they would ever admit. By the time Europe got to the Renaissance, people had rediscovered art, science, architecture, philosophy, and most importantly, how to spoil dogs even more than the nobles had already done. This was the time of great minds. Michelangelo made gods out of stone. Leonardo drew pictures of helicopters. But nobles from the Renaissance came up with something that changed everything. The lapdog that gets way too much attention. Dogs in Renaissance courts got the kind of glow up that reality TV contestants usually get. These little velvet pillow animals didn't come from wolves, they came from anxiety. They shook all the time, needed attention, and were carried around because their legs were just for show. Rich women loved them. A noble woman would walk through a palace wearing 40 pounds of silk, with her hair piled higher than what was expected of her, and a 4-pound dog that looked like it hadn't hunted anything bigger than a crouton in its whole life. This dog ate better than 98% of the people and didn't do anything else except be cute enough to be worth having. But little dogs weren't the only thing going on in the Renaissance. This was also a great time for hunting breeds. Kings and dukes bred huge, elegant hounds that were meant to run after deer at speeds that made knights seriously think about how they worked out. Hunting was no longer just useful, it was art that was performed. Men in tights chased deer while dogs did the real work. A style from the Renaissance. At the same time, artists became very interested in painting dogs. In portraits of noble families, a dog would often sit proudly at their feet, looking more dignified than half the people in the room. In these paintings, dogs stood for loyalty, goodness, and a reminder that a person in the house really knew how to read other people's feelings. There were also the strange little spaniels who sat in women's laps during long carriage rides, balls, banquets, political negotiations, and marriages that people who shouldn't have been in charge set up. These dogs were very important during the Renaissance because they kept their owners from having public meltdowns. There was a lot of drama, betrayal, gossip, poisoning attempts, and bad fashion at royal courts. Having a little dog on your lap made you. At least one reason not to turn over a banquet table. But Renaissance dogs had one thing in common. No matter how small and fluffy or tall and regal they were, they had gone from being scavengers in the Ice Age to being important people in the world's most expensive homes. All of this happened without doing anything but being cute and alive. After thousands of years of chaos, evolution, cultural drama, and really bad grooming choices, looking at you, ancient Egypt, we reach the end of our journey where dogs officially become the first and best friend of all people, not by war, not by political agreements, but by being the most persistent freeloaders in history. Think about it. No other species has been able to get into every era, culture, home, and couch. Dogs did what empires couldn't do. Rome fell apart. Egypt fell, the Renaissance came to an end. People's trends came and went, but dogs kept coming up to me, wagging their tails and begging for food. Dogs had learned everything there was to know about people by the end of the Renaissance. They figured out the formula: be cute, give emotional support, stare hard at people while they eat, act like you understand commands, make money. They changed from wolves that hunted mammoths to animals that freak out when their owner leaves the room for 30 seconds. They went from sleeping in snowdrifts to sleeping across an entire king-sized bed, which made people uncomfortable all night long. And here's something that no historian wants to say. We didn't just become best friends with dogs. They made us theirs by tricking us. Think about how they played with your feelings. Dogs lean their heads. People melt. Softly, dogs whine. People give food. For half a second, dogs look sad. People say sorry for being alive. Dogs, on the other hand, love us no matter what, are loyal, protect us, keep us company, and give us enough fur to knit a whole medieval cloak every week. They protect us, make us feel better, and greet us with the same excitement as if we were meeting a famous person, even if we just went outside to get the mail. But the strangest, most, this is the heartwarming truth. We were chosen by dogs. They didn't have to do it. They didn't get caught. They weren't given money to be good. Okay, maybe they were a little bribed, but ever since that first lonely wolf sat by that first lonely fire, dogs have stayed with us because they liked something about us. Our warmth, our messiness, our scraps, and our stubbornness. People who were fighting ice, famine, empires, plague, heartbreak, and bad architecture found something in dogs that they couldn't find anywhere else. Simple and clear.